I can make something that is deeply traumatic into something where there is these beautiful little pockets of meaning and of love and of joy. Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Death on the Daily. And I'm coming heart full and so excited for today's episode because, and in response to the many questions that I get about my own personal story through the death of our daughter and the grief that I hold and that I will hold for the rest of my life. So I thought, why don't I jump on and do not one, but 2 solo episodes where it's not just going to be me holding the mic and speaking my truth, but I'm going to be doing that with the spirit of my daughter very much channeling through me. And my mission through Death on the Daily really is about encouraging us all to speak our truth, to be able to vocalize about how we're really feeling today, what's coming up for us, as well as to be able to speak our truth when it comes to sharing in the memories of our loved ones and speaking anything out that really needs to be done to help our healing. And the reason that I'm so passionate about this is because when I connect into particularly my past versions of self, but even certain aspects of myself where I feel myself censoring stuff that I just want to be able to say, like speaking my daughter's name into conversations and talking about my journey with her. But I see in our society just how damaging the death avoidance that so many of us have is. And the reality is that with death having been through medicalization pushed out of our homes, and there's been a real severing of us as humanity from our human nature, within which death is a fundamental part of life. What that does for, I wouldn't even say so many of us, I'd say for all of us, because at some point, I mean, we're all going to die, but at some point, 100% of us as well are going to experience pain and grief of loss. So in pushing it into the shadows, we really do ourselves a disservice. So that is what this podcast and this channel is all about. And my mission in my life is just to encourage us, just to sit and to talk about it. Death on the Daily, I almost feel like it's a bit like, imagine if you were having a coffee with a friend. These are the sorts of conversations that I feel are just so rich, not just in how we can hold space for others and help each other to process through the most difficult times of our life, but also because I've learned through my own experience just how powerful death is as a catalyst for bringing more meaning, more love, and more joy into our lives. So bringing this spirit of connection and of all of the life lessons that death can give us, let's flow into this episode where I'm going to be sharing my story. And before we flow into my story, I thought, why not? Let's take a moment of connection and put our hands to our heart if that feels right, if you're able to do that. And if it's comfortable to do so, let's just take a breath together. And otherwise, you can just connect it into your hand on your heart and the warmth that you feel there. And this is a powerful space in storytelling. If you think humanity, we are born storytellers, yet so much of our stories are left untold. And so in this episode, I'm going to be speaking my truth and sharing some aspects of me that have been untold, with the invitation that if you wish to, you might like to grab your journal after you've listened to my story and just start writing down your story, capturing your story of grief, of the love that you feel through loss, of anything that comes up. And I share my story today with the utmost gratitude to my darling daughter, because so much that I share through Death on the Daily has been catalyzed through her. Everything that I do on this podcast is her legacy as much as it is mine. So I think the other thing that's really beautiful when we connect into memories of walking our path with those who have died is that we can also understand what is that, whether it's legacy, whether it's that their ripple effect, what's that continuation of them as it flows and as it channels through each of us. So where I felt really cool to root in at the start of me storytelling in this episode is, well, firstly, in my beautiful daughter's name, which is Ngākau Raiona. And her name means Lioness Heart in my husband's Māori language. And for me, her name is the embodiment of the courage that she has given me. Because in going through what prior to us losing her was the deepest fear within me. If I was to connect in to what am I most afraid of in this life, it most certainly was the fear of losing my child dying, having to bury my child. That flipping of what is, I suppose, the natural order of things, that actually the children bury their parents when they grow old and then they eventually die. That was flipped and reversed. And I had to go through the death of my daughter, the stillbirth of my daughter, and then on the other side, the woodland burial and physically placing her back into the earth. And I wanted to start from this space because when I connect into that fear, I can feel how much it was rooted in me, interwoven into every single fiber of my being, because it's something that was passed down to me from my mum. I'm assuming from all of my ancestors. And I'm assuming that if you're sat here listening and you're a parent, I'm sure every single person who's a parent can relate, or any of us can relate to the fact that we have a fear of losing those who we love, and particularly obviously when they're our children. So that's a fear that I've become really conscious of, because actually I can connect into where I sensed it and where I knew that my mum, when I was young, was acting from that place of fear. I can see it so clearly now. And I can also see how that fear really did create, for example, in my pregnancy, a lot of controlling, a lot of Googling every single thing that was coming up. And how can I tweak my diet here? How can I make sure? How can I control to wrap myself in I remember saying to my husband at the start of pregnancy, when I was like, I can't do that. It's cotton wool time. It's cotton wool time, babes. Like, no. I just wrapped myself in bubble wrap, because anything that I can control, I would do, because I wanted the very best outcome. But actually through this journey, what I've realized in one of my deep integrations, thanks to our daughter, is that certain things we cannot control. And the only thing that actually is true and that we know of is what is in the now, what is in the present moment. And my daughter really did invite me to find presence in a way that I have never, ever done prior to this in my life. And actually, I qualified a few years ago. I'm a meditation teacher. I'm also a coach. So I do a lot with my clients around finding presence. How can we anchor ourselves into the present moment and unearth all of the gifts that lie here? But what I didn't realize is actually how powerful that call to presence can be in our darkest of times, and how in being present, it helped me to unlock a whole heap of meaning, of love, and actually, curiously, at certain points of joy, even in the rawest of my grief. So let's start with when I found out that I was pregnant. And I'm going to just touch a little bit on pregnancy because it brings me a lot of joy to speak about it. And this episode is very much me speaking my truth and sharing all of my experience. So it was at the start of May in 2023, and I did a pregnancy test actually on the day of the full moon eclipse in Scorpio. And I found out I was pregnant. But I knew before then that I was pregnant, obviously through little signs that I sensed in my body. But I actually, just prior to conceiving Ngākau Raiona, I felt her presence really, really strongly. And I knew, I was like, it's a girl. It's a girl, and she's going to look exactly like her daddy. And she was also in my mind a real cheeky. My husband, Jordan, is hilarious. He's a real comedian. And the spirit that I still connect into of Ngākau Raiona is so cheeky, so boisterous, just bubbly and absolutely beautiful. So I connected into this little spirit and I really felt her coming in. And when I found out that I was pregnant, therefore I was surprised because it'd been a long 2-year journey to that point. But equally, I was kind of not surprised. I was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. My intuition was really telling me she's here. She's arriving. So I flowed into the first trimester and all of the usual stuff, absolutely nauseous, not just in the mornings. Food just became an absolute trial. I actually had wisdom teeth issue and I swelled up like a chipmunk at one point because they couldn't operate and take the wisdom tooth out. A lot going on. And I will say that in that control mechanism, because of that fear, that deep fear, what if something happens to my baby? Every single day I was going to Dr. Google to get some perspectives and I was freaking myself out about something else. However, also with my meditation practices, with the resourcing that I gave myself, equally, I will say that there was a lot of moments of me being able to just be present and be really, really connected. And nature was actually a really, really big part of that. Nature is always a big part of me and my journey. But I really, really lent on nature and the grounding that I felt of just feeling my feet as it walked on the earth, as we walked literally through that late spring and that summer with our little bean, my little bean growing inside of me. So we got through the first trimester, and in my mind, I was thinking, all right, you get to the end of the first trimester and you're out of the woods. So I was very nervous going into the scan. The scan, everything looked like it was just flowing beautifully. She was, by all of the measures that they do in the 12-week scan, she was tracking exactly where she needed to be. It was also beautiful to see her because I think to that point, it's sort of, particularly for me, with it being my first pregnancy that went beyond that 6-week mark, it all feels a bit abstract until you see that baby. So we got through the 12-week scan, exited the first trimester, just beautiful. Everything's flowing wonderfully, and settled into the second trimester. And thankfully, around week 13, the nausea also started to subside. I started to love my food again. I'm a big foodie, so it's always a really big thing. And I actually really loved connecting into our baby girl when it came to foods and just knowing that all of this nourishment, I'm not sure exactly what point, but she's going to be tasting it and all of that stuff. So the deep connection to her continued. And I will say, actually, that was really beautiful because in my first pregnancy, the one with the miscarriage at 6 weeks, I really wasn't prepared for how my body would change in pregnancy, literally from the very beginning of it. And so it felt like an out of body experience, and it actually was really quite scary for me. And I didn't really know where to go to articulate those fears and to have those conversations. And I probably, at that point, given who I was then, I didn't feel confident to voice those vulnerabilities. I was always someone who put that shield up and tried to present a positive and can do, and I'm all okay, and I don't need any help sort of front, to the detriment of me. I wasn't at that point really resourced in how can I show up and how can I speak openly and truthfully with all of my vulnerabilities. But actually, I suppose the gift of having those couple of years after that miscarriage was I did a lot of inner work. I really rooted in. I deepened my connection to me and to my body. I also deepened my connection by way of how I communicated and spoke my truth to others. So in my pregnancy with Ngākau Raiona, it was beautiful because I could feel a real deep connection to her, as well as a deep connection to my body. I was just listening in. And that's not to say I wasn't, doing silly things like jumping on Google every 5 minutes. But it was almost, I suppose there was more of a balance by way of me also having that time where I could sink into that embodiment and just surrender and let what was happening to just happen. So we're cruising on through into our second trimester and things started to feel quite real then. That was when I started to look up the maternity wear, started to look up what I wanted to buy for the baby, all of that sort of thing, all of those little joyful moments, and continuing that connection to our darling daughter. And as I was connecting into our girl, I remember lying in bed, and I think it was about the 20-week. Yeah, it was just before the scan. And I started to go, ooh, I can feel what I think are the flutters, those early kicks that you feel. Wasn't too sure. I was a bit like, am I dreaming this or is this real? But it really did start to become real. It happened more and more often. And I was like, all right, there she is. She is kicking. So I was really, really looking forward to, at the same time, pretty effing terrified of the 20-week scan. But in all of my conversations with the midwives, we'd never really spoken about the fact that that 20-week scan is where the sonographer will go into more detail when it comes to the anatomy and whether there are any anomalies. But it hadn't dawned on me that anyone has a termination for medical reasons at, I suppose, a later stage. I knew on some level that it happened, but for me, it felt so abstract and so over here that I was like, well, that's such a small, it's like such a small chance. And we got through the 12 weeks, so we're going to be okay. And there was never any opening of any conversation around the scan. It just felt like, okay, yep, we go, we get the nice pictures, tick, they check everything, and we're going to be fine. We'll be out on the other side. Unfortunately for us, and unfortunately for too many parents, that is not the case, even at the 20-week mark. And we went into our 20-week scan, and the sonographer, it took a while, and I didn't even realize how long that scan would take, but it took a painful amount of time just lying there and hoping and looking at the screen, connecting into her, seeing how much she'd grown, watching her heart. Oh, it was just beautiful. But then the sonographer said, he was focusing on the back of the skull for ages. And he said, I can see something. I can see what looks like a cyst on the back of her head. I can't diagnose you. That would need to be a consultant, which in the UK, consultants in hospitals are the doctors. So he said, you're going to have to come back and we'll arrange it quite quickly for another scan. And my heart just shattered in that moment. I thought, what's going on? No. There can't be a problem here. No way. But he said, I don't know. It could be something that isn't a cause of concern, and it's a cyst that will just, reduce down, and we're going to have a beautiful, healthy baby on the other side. Or he said it could be something more serious, but I can't tell you what. So in that moment, my heart was just, my adrenaline was pumping. And this is the point in our journey when I start to get a little bit of gaps, because there's certain moments where our bodies do what is best for us in that moment, which is, this is so painful. I need to disconnect. I need to disassociate. So that was the start of a few different spaces where I disassociated and left my body. But I did come back into the room for the sonographer to tell us, because we asked him to do so, whether she was a girl or a boy. And he said, she's a girl. And I thought, I knew it. In that moment, I was like, I knew she's a girl. And I was thinking, yeah, she is going to be the spit of Jordan. In my mind, I could literally see her little face. So, so beautiful, just as I was holding her there. So from that point onwards, then we basically had the longest weekend of our lives. And it was actually a bank holiday weekend, which in the UK, it's a holiday weekend where it's a 3-day weekend. And oh my God, every second was torture. We were trying to act like everything was normal. The beautiful parts were Jordan, when he dragged me out into nature, let's go for a walk, just constantly. Should we go for another walk? Let's do it. And just finding that grounding, that connection, but continuing that connection to her, continuing that conversation, because in my heart, all I wanted to do was to connect into my hope. Alongside that, obviously, I was on Google, which was the worst thing to do. Absolutely. And I would say I would give anyone the advice of not hopping on Google, but I also know how flipping hard it is when you don't have any answers and you just want to know. So I went on Google, saw all of the worst case scenarios, freaked myself out about them, but I also saw some best case scenarios. and comforted myself with them. So it was a weekend that just, I mean, it felt like it was about a month long. Fast forward to the following Tuesday, and we went back into the hospital. And it was in the moment where we were walking into the room with the consultant, and I was already, I think I was about halfway up the corridor towards the room, and I just burst into tears. And just before we went into the room, she turned to me and she said, I know, this is really, really hard. I'm so sorry. And as soon as she said, I'm so sorry, my heart just shattered into pieces because I knew this is not good news. So we sat down and we asked for her to tell us the news before she started scanning of what she'd seen. And she said from the scan that she saw on the Friday, she said, I can see that your daughter has what's called encephalocele, which is where the back of the skull hasn't formed properly. And part of her brain is therefore on the outside. And she said it's a really serious birth defect, and it's one that has a prognosis of, at best, our daughter would be able to live for 36 hours outside of the womb, if she even made it that far, because apparently the amniotic fluid is quite harsh when it comes to exposed tissue. And so there was the chance that she would have died before then. There are certain moments where it's like, it's not even like a light switch, because it's literally like a breaking open. In that moment, I shattered. I broke into a million pieces, and I didn't know how those pieces would pick up and be formed back together into any semblance of a whole me. I couldn't imagine not journeying through this lifetime with the daughter who I knew so deeply through my connection to her, and whose life I had dreamt of, not just during pregnancy, but in the 2 years before that, as we'd waited patiently for her to come in. It was the most painful and the most devastating moment of my entire life. And when I mention around those gaps, it's created a lot of gaps, because I know that I disassociated and I disconnected, specifically when I was on the table having the scan, and the consultant was going through everything she was seeing, she was showing us. And I know I went, and at one point she did say to me, she said, are you okay? And I voiced it. I said, because she was giving us obviously all of the diagnosis, all of the information, etc. And I voiced it. I said, I'm not here. I'm out by the car. I'm waiting by the car. I literally, in that moment, my spirit was just like, if I'm over there, then I'm safe. This isn't happening. It's not happening. But I felt that I could see exactly where I disconnected and where I'd gone. And I called myself back into the room. I said, no, you got to be here. You got to be here. So I called myself back in, and we went through the rest of the scan, within which I will say I can still connect into my daughter's heartbeat and her beautiful, beautiful heart. And that is where her name, Ngākau Raiona, Lioness Heart, comes from. It's from that image, which is just forever etched in my mind. It's one that I will be thinking of on my deathbed in so much love and in so much gratitude for her. So we then were faced with a choice, because it was a choice of, do we go through a termination for medical reasons, or do we go through with the pregnancy, and knowing that the reality is our baby wasn't going to be coming home with us, and knowing the reality of what she would be going through with her diagnosis. So we left the room and had to do the longest walk through the maternity waiting room, where there were all of the expectant parents, and some who just left their scans, and they're clutching each other and they're hugging each other because of their beautiful, beautiful scan images. We had to do that long, horrible walk through that space and out into what was the blistering hot sunshine. It was a beautifully sunny day at the end of summer. And I remember coming out from the air condition into the sunlight and just feeling the warmth on my face, feeling the heat on a body where my spirit and my soul just felt like it had just left. It felt like there was nothing left. As I shared, I felt like I'd broken into a million pieces. All those pieces were scattered across the floor of the hospital. And it was that point where I then just started bawling. And Jordan and I got into the car, and obviously Jordan was crying too. It's just all of our emotions flowing and flooding. And I messaged two of my dear friends who I had told about the scan, and I messaged them and told them the news. I just had to tell someone, but I at that point didn't feel resourced enough to tell my family. So I messaged my friends, and my dear friend Christiana, she called me immediately. And in that, I remember pushing myself back really hard into the seat. And I said to her, I will never get through this alive, Christiana. I won't. And she said, you will, you can, and you will. And I said, how do you know? How do you know I will? And she said, because I've been through the same. And Christiana actually really with so much heart shares her story in episode 2. So if you haven't checked that out and you want to, that episode is there for you. In that moment, I breathed and I thought, okay, it was the start. It was the opening of a well of resilience that I didn't even know that I could hold. And so I leant back into my chair after my conversation with Christiana, and I remember I felt, the rawest of grief, the depths of devastation. Couldn't even fathom what this forwards path would look like. But in that moment, I actually snapped back into presence thanks to Ngākau Raiona. So I felt her kicking inside of me, and I felt those little familiar flutters. And I realized in that moment, she is alive and literally kicking within me now. And I realized that there are still gifts. This is not the end of our journey. This is a new chapter that was opening, but that I wanted to be with her in this moment. I wanted to journey with her, and I wanted to soak up every single second that I had left with her. And so I whispered a promise to her, which was really rooted in a promise from me as her mother to her. Much like any parent, you're going to be there in your child's darkest of days. So I was going to be in it with her. I wasn't going to leave her side. So I whispered to her, I'm here with you, baby. I'm not going to leave you no matter what. I love you. And that whisper to her was my promise as her mama. I'm not going to leave your side. And I actually apologized in some of the conversations that I had with her on that day and then in the subsequent days for me having disconnected in the scan. I thought, do you know what? I did disconnect then. I'm really, really sorry, but I'm going to be here with you no matter what. And the most incredible thing, and this is where my gift to her, I say it's a gift to her, my obligation for her as a mother ended up being her greatest gift to me. Because from that point onwards, for the next 4 weeks, I have never been more present than I have in my entire life. I still am grappling with how that call to presence really did just anchor me into it. I was in it. I was in the thick of it with our daughter, with my husband. We were in it together, and I never once left her side through her death, through her stillbirth, and all the way through to her woodland burial. And what I wanted to share here is that I have so much compassion for those moments where I did disconnect and I did disassociate. So if you're listening to this, what I want to share is that actually it's perfectly natural that our body does that. And I never want in me sharing my story for anyone to listen and go, I should have been more present then. Why wasn't us? Because that's not the reality of us as humans. And I am definitely not present a lot of the time. But for me, what the real integration of from this journey was the power of that intentionality when it comes to those calls to present. Just how much our awareness of, oh, okay, I've disconnected, I've disassociated from this situation, how powerful just being able to sit with an intention of, I'm here for me no matter what. I'm not going to leave my side. Just how powerful that can be as an invocation for presence. So after that car journey, I was all in it, in the rawest of my grief on those days where, I mean, every second just felt like absolute torture. I just felt like someone was just cut my body open and was just playing with like all of my internal organs and just squeezing them. And it was so visceral and so painful at points. But in being present with my grief, I also saw that that pain is impermanent, that actually there was also moments where things felt a lot more normal, or there were moments where I just felt absolutely flooded with love, or where I could connect in the last couple of days that we shared together to her little baby kicks and to having conversations with her and to singing to her and to cooking delicious meals and knowing that that is nourishing her to the very, very end. There was so much meaning and purpose that came in through me being able to be present with it all. And I've shared in this podcast before, one of the practices that really supported me was journaling. And that was thanks to my husband, Jordan. He actually said to me, you love journaling and you've always found it really, really supportive. He said to me, just start capturing all of this. And one day you might like to look back on it, or maybe not. It's all good. And also what he did, which I think is really, really beautiful. And I would definitely, definitely recommend this if anyone else is walking a similar path to mine. And if you are, I'm sending you so much love from all of my heart, because I know how difficult it is. Capturing those memories along the way was so powerful in the healing that they've brought me since. So Jordan continued to take the baby bump photos all the way to the day that we were going to the hospital for the induction for her stillbirth. And I look back on those photos now with such pride and such joy. And I'm so pleased that I've got those photos in my memory box. So there was a lot of the ups and downs of grief. And over the next few days, for the first day, I think it was about a day and a half, felt her kicking. And we'd gone into the hospital to basically take the drugs that started the ending of our pregnancy. And I have to give a shout out to Rhiannon, who is the bereavement midwife at Whipps Cross Hospital. And Rhiannon and all of the team there, I'm in awe of the NHS and everything that they do. When it comes to situations like this, I really do think this is where it just shines through in the amount of compassion and connection that I felt through that team and that I've continued to feel since. And so we'd taken the drugs, I forget what the drugs called to end the pregnancy. And we were back home waiting for, I think that was on the Tuesday. And then I think I was going in or maybe it was a Wednesday. And then I was going into the hospital on the Friday. Yeah, it was on the Wednesday. And I was going into the hospital on the Friday for the induction. So after I'd taken the drugs and we'd gone back home, and it was just the waiting game. And I started to feel the next day that the little flutters were a little bit lighter. Things were changing. And I connected into her and I was singing to her, and I loved rocking and dancing because I felt like that was just going to rock her gently to sleep. And as I was flowing through that day on the Thursday, I really did connect into the fact that this is going to be my last day with her living. And it felt so painful in so many ways, but it also was so beautiful in so many ways. And I was journaling everything. At the same time as well, I felt really passionately about writing her birth and her death plan, because we knew that, well, obviously this was completely different to what we'd expected, which was we'd be going in, end of the third trimester, we'd have our birth plan all worked out, we'd have had the time, we'd have had lots of conversations. And I knew I was going in completely unequipped, completely unresourced. I had no idea. This was my first birth that I would be going through in the most devastating of circumstances, and way before my body, my mind, my heart, my spirit was ready for that baby to come out. So I wrote my birth and death plan for her. And I will say that that was something that I found really scary before I started it. And the reason I did that actually was because I'd literally, just before I became pregnant, done training to become an end of life doula. So in that, there's a lot around writing death plans. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna write my birth and death plan. And with the support of my fellow end of life doulas who I trained with, they were cheering me on, and they read the plan and they were shedding tears with me. It was just so beautiful. And I shared that with the hospital, and the hospital actually were like, oh, this is really interesting, because I would imagine for a lot of parents who go through that, that's probably not something that, again, you would ever think of doing. And it's something that actually I would say that I do believe that it brought me a lot. So I hope that in me sharing my story, maybe it might just influence someone else to say, actually, there's some areas where I can get things down. I can write a plan. I can make this into, well, it's a terrible, terrible, like the worst experience, but I can make something that is deeply traumatic into something where there is these beautiful little pockets of meaning and of love and of joy. So I wrote that plan, and within that, it was all around obviously the labor side of things, but also it was around, what do I want to prioritize after she's born? I wanted to hold her quickly. That was really important for me. I wanted to have lots of time with her. I wanted to be left alone, me and my husband, with her. I wanted to have rituals that I would do with her. I wanted to bathe her, the one bath that, as a mother, that I was able to give my daughter. I wanted to anoint her with sandalwood oil, because that is connected into the Hinduism that runs through my mom's side of the family and is a really big part of my own spirituality. And there was so many other little rituals that I wanted to do. I involved my husband, but he was kind of a bit like, no, you craft this, and I'm all good. But actually the beautiful thing was then in the hospital, seeing him really lean in and him getting involved in all of it. We were also allowed, because it was a part of the hospital where you went in through your own private entrance and didn't have to go through sort of the normal, like the labor wards, etc. So we were allowed to bring a flower in, which was actually a recommendation from one of my fellow doulas to bring my favorite flower in. And there was a buddleia bush in our garden, the butterfly bush as it's called, that I'd connected into every single day in pregnancy. I'd been smelling those beautiful, beautiful flowers. So I took a sprig from the buddleia bush in to be next to our daughter. And so that smell is always going to be wrapped into my memories of her. And so I poured my heart into the birth and death plan, and then we were getting ready to go into the hospital. Now, on the Friday, we were due to go into the hospital, and I was dreading it. I had no idea what I was going to face. I had no idea how I would get through it alive. I still was in disbelief that I would be able to survive this experience. And in the morning, Jordan said, let's go for a walk. Come on. So we went for a walk and we took the final bump photo. And then we got ready to go into the hospital. To be honest, I just crammed some random clothes into a bag. No idea what I was packing. And off we went. In the hospital, with the incredible team. And again, just shout out to the wonderful, wonderful team at Whips Cross Hospital. And then we went into the induction of her labor. So I had to take more of, I forget the name of the drugs that I had to take to basically start the induction of the labor. And my parents had come to visit us, and then they'd left, and it was at about 10 p.m. on that Friday night that the labour started in earnest. And it was really, really quick, and it was really, really painful. It came through so quickly. And I just want to also touch upon the fact that for any person who's in my situation of having to go through an induction at that point in the pregnancy, like all the hypnobirthing, all of that stuff, the breathing, the classes, everything, you haven't done any of that. So you have no idea. So I was just in such, I mean, I don't even know if it was a state of shock. I was just in so much pain, both in the physical as well as in the emotional, the grief roaring through me. But actually, in a weird way, what happened was I connected into the contractions as a construct that also applied into my grief. So as I was going through the contractions, which were coming through really quite rapidly, I didn't get very much space in between them. And it was just horrendous, and I was roaring, and I was just on my hands and my knees. It's just, I mean, yeah, everything. Anyone who's ever been through a labor will know just how painful it is. But what I realized is that on the release, the bit in between the contractions, there was an impermanence there. It doesn't last forever. And I realized that actually I could get through each of those contractions. And on the other side, there was that ecstasy of, there's a release here. Okay. And I remember having a conversation with one of the midwives there, just incredible. And I had a conversation with one of the midwives about this. So kind. And she was stood there. She had such a kind face, and she's just stood there, and I'm just sort of giving her a dialogue as I'm going through the contractions. And then I went on to the other side, and I just said, you know what? The contractions are teaching me everything that I need to know about grief, in realizing that everything in this life is impermanent, in realizing that I can hold all of this because it's not going to last forever. This pain in its visceral rawness, it's not going to be like this forever. So we were flowing through the labor, and it was really painful on the emotional level as well. And I was just screaming and roaring in my tears. And I do remember, actually, there was one midwife who came in, and bless her, like I do think it's a generational thing. So there, I received this with so much compassion, but she said to me, "Oh, don't cry," at a point where I was roaring. And because of the work that I'd already been doing of training to become an end-of-life doula, and being really curious and interested in death and grief, and reading heaps of books, I said to her, no, don't stop me. I need to cry right now. I need to express this. And so she said, okay, you cry. And so I cried, and I roared our daughter into this world. So it was in the early hours of the morning, my waters broke. And that was actually a moment in me feeling really present with it, that actually my husband and I, we could share in a moment of awe, and actually of joy and of release of, oh my God, I did this. We did this with our daughter. We did this. So my waters broke, and then it all happened really, really quickly into the final throes of labor, and into her coming into this world at a point where I really was thinking, I can't stomach this pain. I need to go all the way up to something, whatever the heaviest bit of painkillers, of whatever you can do, just do it. So they had an anesthetist come in to speak to me. And I remember I'd just been hitting the gas and air, and I was flying because, I mean, I haven't drunk since 2020. So I was like floating on the ceiling, and he comes in, he's trying to speak serious stuff to me, and he goes, should I come back? Are you okay? And I just said, I've just hit the gas and air. I think I need a moment. So he left, and actually I'm pleased that he did, because it was in that time that she was then born. And I remember the ecstasy of meeting her. Obviously, the ecstasy alongside the rawest of the grief of the fact that this is my beautiful, beautiful girl, and I'm not going to get to take her home with me. I'm not going to get to live this life with her. I'm not going to get to do everything that I wanted to uplift her, to give her roots and wings and let her fly. But instead, she's going to be flying in a very different way. And I remember looking at her little face, and she looked exactly like Jordan. And I was like, yeah, she looks exactly like her daddy. She's a girl and she looks exactly like her daddy. And she was going to have been funny as hell, exactly like her daddy. And Jordan and I got to spend the most precious, precious morning with her. We did all of those rituals. We captured so many photos. And I have made a commitment to her and to all of my future children that I won't actually be sharing any pictures of my children out through social media in public or anything like that, because I want them to be able, I mean, she won't be able to make her own choice, but I want my children to make their own choice. That's where I want to go by way of my children and how much I show of them, I suppose, in the social media space, or for example, through episodes of Death on the Daily. I probably won't share pictures of her ever through this space, because for me, that is personal to us. But for anyone who knows me, I'm always willing, and I'm always actually joyful to share those pictures of her with anyone who is up for seeing who my beautiful daughter is, because to me, she is the most beautiful, most angelic thing ever. She's our little Maori princess. She looks exactly like her daddy. And that morning that we spent with her was so, so precious. We spent, I think she was born at 4 a.m., about 4:19 a.m., I think. 4:19? Yeah, 4:19. And then we spent I'm like probably like my mum, where I remember asking her, what time was I born? And my mum was like, I have no idea. Let me check that. It took about 3 months for her to find the piece of paper with it written on. But so around 4:19. But then we stayed with her until I think it was around about 1 o'clock in the afternoon when we left. And we bathed her and we kissed her, we cuddled her, we said everything that we wanted to. She laid on my chest. Oh, it was just beautiful and joyful and painful and horrendous all at the same time. But again, being present with it all meant that I was able to access all of the joy and all of the love that I think can be very curious to anyone who hasn't had an experience like this. And I've actually read it in the memoirs of other women who have had stillbirths at whatever stage, that not obviously this isn't going to be everyone's experience, but there is a lot of stories when it comes to that, the flooding of the endorphins and the fact that, oh my God, there's my baby. I'm so proud. I'm so joyful and I love you. And this is also really effing hard and painful. So that was our story with our darling daughter. And this is part one. I'm going to share in the next episode a part two of our journey, which is going to take us into my grief journey beyond. Really, what was that like for me, and how did I navigate those, as I call them, the contractions of grief? Because there was so many lessons that I integrated there that I've taken forwards into my life, into really realizing I've got a well of resilience. I can hold all of this. So I'm going to close out my storytelling with my darling daughter there. And where I wanted to end this episode is just with a few integrations that she's taught me and that I love to share, because if it can help you wherever you are in your journey, or if it can inspire you to also look for those meaning-making moments as you're navigating death, grief, and those difficult and painful experiences in life, that I believe is such a gift that we can pour forth out into the world. So my key lessons that I've learned from my darling daughter and that I continue to integrate, because this is a continued journey of my own growth through grief. And a few key lessons that I just wanted to spotlight today are, firstly, the fact that we humans, we are stronger and can hold more than we give ourselves credit for. And I think this only really integrates when we've been through something, a trauma like I've been through, a forwards path through grief where we're continuing to hold onto that pain. Because the reality for me, and people recoil when I tell them this is a pain that's within me every single day. I feel it. At any point in my day, I can connect into the fact that my heart hurts because my heart was broken. But that's okay. I've integrated and I've accepted it. And I've also understand my capacity to be able to hold that alongside all of the joy and the laughter and the just everything, all of the different aspects that make us whole as a human. I've also learned that everything in this life is impermanent. And my daughter's brief existence within me really, really taught me that. Because the only thing that we know is what's present today. We don't know when any of us are going to meet our end. So why not enjoy the gifts that are here in the now? And that is really, really what I did with Ngākau Raiona in our final few days together. It was really about that. You are here. You are alive within me now. So as painful as this is, and I'm going to allow that pain to flow, but I'm also going to connect into the joy and the opportunities for laughter and meaning making and connecting into things that are going to become precious and prized memories. So I wanted to close out this episode with my note to self. And this is really inspired by my journey, actually, because in me journaling, I was also writing these little notes to myself as I flowed through the experience of the death and stillbirth and then burial of our darling daughter. And these notes to self really have resourced me, and they continue to resource me. And so this is an invitation, whether you want to integrate this note to self into your forwards path, or if you want to grab your journal and straight after this, write your own note to self. What's coming up for you after we've connected and you've come into my story? What stories do you want to tell? What notes to self do you want to write to yourself? So my note to self today is this, and this is literally from my journaling in the aftermath of our daughter's death. And I wrote to myself this: intention is everything in the path to finding presence. In my darkest moment, I called myself back into presence through simple words, allowing myself grace when my pain, sorrow, racing mind, or anything else takes me away from the now. So that's my note to self. And if you want to join me again, we can just place a hand to our heart. Take a breath in and connect into any intention of presence. Because if my daughter's taught me anything, it's just how many gifts there are in the present moment. That when we disconnect, when we let our mind whir and race and take us away and take us into the online world, takes us away from the heart of this whole human experience of being able to experience everything, because that we can. So wherever you are in this journey, at the end of this episode, I just obviously want to share all of my love. If you're going through similar, if you've been through similar and you're navigating the forwards path with your grief, as I still am, my heart is pouring out to you. I'm sending you all of my love. And if you're just journeying through life, I would also say for all of us, we can share our stories, we can share in others' stories, and that really is the key to our healing as humans. So there's going to be a part 2 that's going to be coming out next week. And in that, we're going to be looking at my forwards path through grief. But wherever you are in your journey, as we close out on this episode, just go it with heaps of grace, heaps of compassion, and heaps of love. And know that I'm always sending you lots and lots of love. All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more dead conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's some